So a couple of months ago, I started to hear about Claude Code and then also Codex at AI meetings. And I had no idea what it was. I assumed it was for developers, and I was definitely not a developer. I also assumed that it was pretty much the same as the online LLMs, that it was just another chatbot. Sure, it could generate you documents, but you can do that on the web browser. So that's what I assumed. But as it kept on getting constantly brought up, I started asking more questions about it. And I realized it was completely different from what we have access to or the normal users have access to. And I was very new to coding. And this felt like a tool that was built for someone else. But eventually I decided just to try it. And here is what happened. So first, I had to install it, which if you've talked to anybody, that's probably the most difficult part, especially for someone who's not technical. Then I typed what I wanted, and after I actually got it up and working, I had a working website appeared in under 5 minutes, and I had not written a single line of code. And then I took it a step further and started to make edits to that website, and the edits were precise, and I was just shocked at how much I could do just using Claude Code. Again, the setup was harder than the building, especially on Windows. That part took some time, but once I was through it, the tool itself was surprisingly straightforward. So after I used it to create the website, I wanted to take it a step further and use it for my actual job. But before we get into that, I do want to show you the website I actually created. And I know this isn't live, it's still on my local drive. I've looked into ways on how to actually launch it, and it's usually not too difficult from there. But just the amount I was able to do for this website was amazing. I showed this to actually some of my coworkers who are not too familiar with Claude coding or AI to code. So the biggest things was the articles. These articles were actually found online and then put into this, all from a simple prompt. The data was another big one. These were all graphs that Claude Code created, and it actually researched all of this information too, just from a simple prompt. And there's so much you can do. This was just a beginner level website. You could add so many different skills now that I know to even advance this website even more. But it just shows you how easy it is to create things with Claude Code. But so after the website, I decided I wanted to take it a step forward, and I actually had a project at my job that worked perfectly for something I could test it with. And what I created was basically a small notebook outline. So what it would do is it would take documents I gave it and actually break those documents down into chunks. I believe it's called chunking, and then we put that into a vector database. And then from there, I used an AI API key to actually search those chunks and then bring back answers based on queries. And with that project, I also learned that I could create an interface for this, or a UI. So this is a file I actually created when I was making this project, and you can see how it's set up. I won't dive too deeply into that. And so once I created this, I just started creating everything I could think of. I started trying to create applications that went out and grabbed open job sources and then brought it back and gave you a list. I got a little bit crazy with it, but the latest thing I did was I actually built my own desktop app for a budgeting tool that I could use personally. So this is the desktop app I actually created. These are all fake numbers that I have just for this presentation, but I made this in just a night. And I'm continuing to add on to it, but it gives you a dashboard with all your banking options and then your transactions, so you can actually upload Excel files or CSVs. I've made it so it actually takes the Excel files I download directly, which I thought was pretty great because I can customize it directly for that. You have your subscriptions, your goals, your net worth, and then also an AI advisor that you can actually set up using an API key. You have your custom categories and then also accounts that you can add, and then reconciliation for this, category rules, CSV presets, and you could even export the data. And I created this all in a night. And now I'm actually working on AI workflows with the actual agents and creating those and seeing what those are like. After spending a month of working on this, almost probably 10 hours or more a week, every time I get home from work, I'm using Claude Code or Codex. I realized probably at the very beginning, within a week, that Claude Code is not a chatbot. It is an agentic tool in the realest sense of the word. It reads your files, it runs commands, makes changes on its own. It generates you documents, compiles research for you. And that alone makes it a different mental model than what ChatGPT on the web browser is. With this realization of this completely different tool, there are different things you have to figure out when you're using this. The first is, of course, the setup, and you have to learn how to download it to your terminal, and then where it works, whether you use it on your terminal or your command prompt, or you use it on VSL or anti-gravity, and then how it interacts with your whole computer. So if it's on your command prompt, it could pretty much touch anywhere in your computer. But if you're in VSL or anti-gravity, you usually open a folder and you're just working on that. And so the structure is completely different. You have a global Claude and then local Claudes, in which you can have agents in the global that will pretty much activate anytime you're working in Claude. And then the local ones, you can create agents there or skills there, and it only activates in that local area. So it's a completely different mindset change when it comes to working with AI. The biggest one I have been dealing with is context window. This is a concept nobody explains to you when you start. When you use ChatGPT in the web browser, most of the time you never reach the end of your context window unless it's just a really long conversation and then you just start over a new one. And you could tell in ChatGPT that it starts to decline after a point, but it's completely different in Claude Code and Codex because it actually affects the outputs that you're working with. So if you're generating documents or doing research, it will affect that work that the agent is doing or the coding. So you have to pay attention to that. And then you also have to kind of realize the structure of that, what goes into it, whether it's skills, the documents it's reading, all of that goes into it. Every file it reads, every command output, and then there's a token usage percentage at the bottom of your terminal. When that number gets too high, the quality of the output starts to drop and you have to manage it yourself. And when it does get too large, then you could command it to compact the context window, which summarizes the session and then frees up space and then clears it, which resets it entirely. Neither one deletes your files, they just clear the working memory. So you have to get in the habit of doing that. There's constantly new information coming out about context windows and how to manage it. The other thing that I've been figuring out, and it was a steep learning curve, was actual folder structure. That matters a lot because Claude reads your file paths to understand what it is working on. So a well-organized project means Claude spends less time of its context figuring out what is going on. And just being more precise on what you want Claude to do, that will save you some context. For example, don't ask it to read your whole folder if you just want it to read some context to do a task. So all of these things are just huge mental model changes. Once I started to understand those things and actively researching them, I started to get more consistent with the work I was doing and my outputs. So the result, I was able to create a working website, a budget report that took a fraction of the time, work tools that I actually use every week, and work tools that I use for my YouTube side project. And then the setup was hard. The learning curve was hard as well. But once you started to work with these tools, it's actually so much fun to work with, and you can pretty much build anything you want. So if you constantly have ideas about things you could do at work, at home, then you will be constantly exploring and trying new things. And for me, I'm at the point where I don't have enough time to do everything I want, so it's hard to take things off the list. So what I would tell my earlier self is the first thing is the setup is the hard part. Do not let the terminal intimidate you. As you start to actually set it up in your terminal, I would use ChatGPT or Claude to help guide you through the process as you're setting it up and ask it questions. Start to actually learn what is going on. Learn like the simple commands. Do that as you're learning how to implement these tools because it will help in the long run. The next thing is watch your token counter, that being your context windows. So run compact or the command clear between tasks, because if that starts to build up, your output starts to go down immediately. And then the next thing would be to spend time on designing your folders deliberately. Spend time researching that outside of this too, to find out what works best. The next thing is definitely write a Claude MD file. I didn't get into this too much at the beginning of the video, but that is also a must because it keeps Claude focused on the actual project and doesn't stray too much or drift with when you do have a Claude MD file. And then the last thing is start with one small task. The first session is always the hardest, and then it gets easier from there. So that is everything I wish I had known. Now, one question for you. What is the first thing you would build if you tried Claude Code this week? Drop it in the comments. Thank you. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you guys.